Hey folks, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Alysa Perreras. I am so excited to be in community with you all today virtually. I am logging in from Medellin, Colombia. And just a little bit about me. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate at University of San Diego, and one of my research interests is the practice of anti-racism in international schooling. And a year ago, I was given the opportunity to teach a multicultural ed course. And having been in international schools, I had been in international teaching for going on 9 years, in education for about 13. And I was excited about this opportunity, but I had seen so many ways that multiculturalism had been used in international schools in very watered down ways. We saw a lot of what Dr. Jevon and I had talked about, which is flags, foods, and festivals, as opposed to real critical thinking. And so I had a relationship with Dr. Jevon from my time with SUNY as a master's student. And I came to him, really thinking deeply about what I wanted this course to be. And I was centering myself a lot in this bell hooks quote, not necessarily in the quote itself, but the content of the quote. I kept thinking to myself, how can this course be a place where educators can really build vigilant awareness around the systems of oppression that exist in international schools. International schools are not inherently less oppressive simply because they have a quote unquote international population. And yet I had seen that narrative, that conversation be pretty dominant in the international school circuit. And so I wanted the course to be really deeply rooted in building this awareness around all the ways that we must continually undermine the socialization, as Bell Hooks refers to it, that lead up to behaviors that can perpetuate domination. And I wanted that to be an aspect of the course, right? I wanted that to be an outcome of the course, that educators, the teachers who took this course felt that multiculturalism wasn't just flags, foods, and festivals, but it was an opportunity to combat domination and dominant ideologies and oppressive ideologies. And Dr. J had I had a lot of wonderful conversations around that. And as somebody who was a mentor to me, he also gently reminded me, there is more to this work than just that, though, Alysa. I want to remind you that there is more to it than just building awareness, just systems of oppression. And in our partnership, I was able to listen to him and to learn and build a course that also included radical dreaming.
Absolutely. And so welcome everyone. And I'm talking to two different audiences here. And so my name is Jevon Hunter. I'm the Woods Wheels Endowed Chair for Urban Education. And so when Alysa came to me wanting to teach this course that's offered by Buffalo State, it's SPF 500. The title of it is Multicultural Education. What we wanted to do was really push the boundaries of what we mean by multicultural education. And actually, to be quite honest, we wanted to shift the conversation to much more critical forms. This is in no way to diminish the wonderful, beautiful work that had been done by James and Cherry Banks in establishing multicultural education, but really to expand and to talk with more explicitness about systems of power. And so how we get to this idea, this notion of radical dreaming, is really me pushing on the idea. This is a concept that I've been playing around with for quite some time. And what it involves, quite simply, is how do we create space and ways for our teachers and our student teachers to think differently about curriculum development? How can it be deliberate? How can it be strategic? How can it be imaginative? Involving these educational acts that move communities and youth towards emancipatory educational processes. You see there that so much about this notion of radical dreaming is about envisioning, crafting, enacting, and at times demanding that we create something different. And so I like to always end here with this idea of how do we afford our students, our teacher candidates, our classroom teachers, the opportunity to dream the future anew? And when I speak about this, I mean this in the ways in which, how do we deliver a curriculum that challenges what Ighodaro and Wiggins talks about in terms of curriculum violence? Because violence happens through curriculum. How do we ensure what Damon Sojourner talks about in terms of curricular evisceration, so that way our young people see themselves? And then the last point here, how do we prevent what the team of love refers to as spirit murder, where our young people's spirits, their emotional and psychological well-being isn't somehow being murdered by the curriculum that we present in front of them. So that's where this notion of radical dreaming comes from, the idea of dreaming the future anew. And that's where we come in. This is where I was pushing Alysa, because one thing that we know about our teachers, they like to do work. Teachers are really good about doing stuff. And so while it was great that Alysa was going to introduce these different concepts, these different theoretical frameworks, at the end of the day, so when will our teachers have an opportunity to put these into practice so that they can see the fruition of their work? And that's where radical dreaming comes in. Alysa?
And so from many conversations around what might it look like for teachers in this course to engage with radical dreaming while also having the opportunity to confront the systems of oppression and the ways that those systems harm, and as Dr. J mentioned, cause spirit murdering to our children, we realize, this is our problem statement. At a time where multicultural education has been misinterpreted, misapplied, and disappropriated, how do we engage theory and practice so that classroom teachers can, in more robust ways, do this work of educational justice beyond just theory, but into the practice? And so from that problem statement was the development of 2 questions of inquiry that really drove the course. One, how do we locate and attend to processes and practices of harm, abuse, dehumanization, and education in our classroom? And to give a little bit of context as well, in international schooling, many of the populations that are served in these schools are highly privileged when it comes to race and class. These are the intersects of how race and class work, particularly in Colombia. So the predominantly white community, very wealthy. And yet it was important to be able to dialogue with teachers about buying into systems of oppression is also dehumanizing, right? And this is the work of Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed. And we cannot be fully human while we are taking away the humanity of another. And so it was important that teachers, even in this context, were able to locate and attend to processes and practices of harm. But as Dr. Jevon shared, we knew that, or he knew, and he pushed me to that point as we partnered together, that it had to be more than just that. And so our second question of inquiry was, how do we imagine, craft, and enact this emancipatory educational process and processes and practices in community with our youth? So I'm going to share just briefly some of the activities and ways that we engage teachers and educators in this first question. It's interesting because while CRT, critical race theory, has been the topic of quite a lot of conversation in the United States recently, it's really actually was last year when we were crafting, or a year and a half ago when we were crafting the syllabus for this course, a fundamental component of how we attended to this question: how do we locate and attend to process and practices of harm? So we looked at some CRT tenets like intersectionality, asking our teachers to explore all of the various memberships that they had in their social groups. CRT tenet as community cultural wealth, asking scholars in our course to think about how do you bring in what you already have in your context into your learning, and looking at the concept of racism as not coincidental, but an intentional process and byproduct of white supremacy, and ordinary and endemic. So to look at what some of those activities looked like, for intersectionality, we had folks read this book, Is Everyone Really Equal? And through this book, there was a few guiding questions where we really asked folks to think about what is their identity and how does their identity impact the way that they move and operate in the world? And how is that concept of identity, that concept of even privilege, fluid? You'll see here a quote from a teacher in one of the reflections that he did. He talked about his struggle in ways that he's had to struggle with his sexuality and his religion in the country, but also being aware that he had the privilege to hide those struggles at times, a privilege that he had being a US-born white male, a privilege that didn't extend to his Black husband, as you see here in his reflection. And so what inviting intersectionality into the very early stages of our course. This was assignment number 1. It set folks up for a mental model that invited all of us to think about this work as nuanced and beyond binaries. There isn't a yes or a no or a right or a wrong, but there's complexities and nuance in how we tackle anti-racist work. Another activity we had folks do was through this lens, this CRT lens of community cultural wealth. Some names you might see there that are familiar, and Dr. Jay's already mentioned the work of Dr. Bettina Love. We had them look at some of the giants of multicultural education, as we referred to them, watch some videos coming out of the United States, but also recognizing that this is work that was happening in Medellin, Colombia, and providing context of how is this happening, in how can we see how these scholars of this work are in dialogue and not simply engaging folks from a singular Western lens, right? Even having the flexibility to ask folks to engage in ways that felt comfortable to their culture. So one of these assignments included folks just being in dialogue in a Padlet and kind of talking back and forth to each other with the guiding question, how are these scholars talking to one another? How do these scholars that you explored from the United States in dialogue with these scholars from Colombia? And you'll see even here, offering folks the flexibility to translanguage. We have folks talking in English, switching to Spanish, back to English, back to Spanish. And what this tenet offered for our course, you'll see here in this quote, because after they did the Padlet dialogue, they submitted sort of a reflection of their learning. This was a Colombian teacher. The course is made up of both what in the international schooling community we refer to as expats or foreign hires and local hires. And this was a Colombian teacher reflecting that this framework of embedding community cultural wealth, of not just saying, okay, well, what's the US perspective of this? But how does this look like in your community, in your context, created a greater sense of belonging and ownership in the learning. In her reflection, she admitted when she takes these courses, oftentimes she tends to check out because everything seems to come from a US lens, but through this activity, through this assignment, there was a deeper sense of ownership and belonging in the learning. And one last assignment to share with y'all. We also did a few assignments to really help build this understanding why anti-racism matters. Why are we saying anti-racism as a part of multiculturalism, right? Why are we extending our thinking around this? And folks had an opportunity to really sit with and grapple with this idea of racism as ordinary and endemic. And they had all these questions to think about, but because this is not going back to that first point about binaries, this isn't necessarily a easy yes or no, I'm gonna believe this or not believe this. We know we had to let folks really tangle with this a little bit, grapple with it. And so we had a three-pronged assignment where they created these dominant narrative boards in class. One of their in-class assignments was to work together answering these questions, using images from the media, using social media, using conversations they have at the dinner table. And then they were actually asked as part of the assignment to go home and talk to their family and friends, talk to their partners, talk to their neighbors, talk to whoever they wanted to talk to. They didn't have to report back to us who they talked to. They didn't have to ask permission about who they talked to. They were simply asked, go and be in dialogue about this. This conversation we're having in class, see how you can take it home. And then in the final loop of this conversation, they created a podcast in which they simply shared their reflections together as we had them grouped in threes. And I want to share a quick clip from one of the podcasts that they submitted. Now, I realize I'm going to have to stop sharing and reshare so I can do sound. I forgot to do that. Here we go. I'm going to share a quick clip from the podcast.
In Colombia, after these conversations, I'm finding that a lot of the internalized ways that you assess the value of another person is the job they hold, the strata and the color of their skin, their identity religiously or their sexual orientation or so on. And I think that a lot of people internalize that and then they express that as a valid way of determining how you should treat another person or less than another person based on those things. And that's definitely a huge issue.
So what I want to quickly point out before I hand it back over to Dr. Jevon is what I found beautiful about this reflection is often especially in international schooling, or I guess I'll say in my experience in international schooling, folks are very caught up in decorative words like empathetic learner or global citizen, and don't necessarily engage with anti-racism because they have this ideology or this process that I'm either a racist or I'm not a racist. And it's obviously easier to say I'm not a racist. And so I'm just going to say I'm not a racist and keep it moving. And including this tenet of critical race theory and providing this threefold way to dialogue. It wasn't, read this text and tell us what you think about it, but knowing that this requires dialogue, this requires really different perspectives. Folks were given opportunities to dialogue with the full class, to create those dominant narrative boards, to go home and dialogue with their family, to come back and reflect together. What I appreciate about Trevor's reflection, he was one of the students, one of the teachers in the classes. What I think happened as a result of this assignment was folks were really starting to challenge the notion of us versus them, or BIPOC educators, Black, Indigenous, people of color versus white, or local versus foreign. And they were really starting to think deeply about how can we shift into us versus the systems that we've inherited. His reflection is an example of what I am seeing is that there are systems that create harm. There are systems that create bias. There are systems that folks enact on. And I think that those reflections came because of the opportunity to explore racism as ordinary and endemic through this very multifaceted, threefold approach. So there was many opportunities for us to attend to that, or to spend time allowing teachers to ask that question: how do we attend to, how do we locate the systems of harm and the ways that those systems of harm ultimately impact our students?
So, go ahead.
All you.
Yeah, so it's at this point, folks, that we had the opportunity. So after we laid down the conceptual framework, after we had our teachers engage in using technology in creative ways to engage in dialogue with others, to come back, commune with each other and share out. You saw the use of Padlet, you saw these other digital tools. What we wanted the students to do is to take that knowledge, take those experiences, and now start to craft something, right? So take all of that conceptual knowledge and let's see what we can do to put it into action. And so this is where we talk about radical dreaming being enacted through the curriculum. So what we asked our students to do, or we invited them to do, is to create a mini unit where they apply this work, the work of educational justice. And what we wanted them to do was to spend time putting the concepts into practice in a unit. And so this unit is definitely designed to help move the students that they work with towards a more just society. It was designed to get them to tackle those difficult conversations that take place. But as Alysa mentioned, what was important was that this is in the context of Columbia, right? That we wanted to honor the knowledge, the experiences, the resources, the organizations within the communities in Columbia. So it wasn't so much about taking US-based or US-based frameworks of anti-racist education, but really about taking a look, what can we learn and then apply in our own learning context. So Alysa presented to you all some of the different assignments that were created. These were new assignments that we used to engage them in this work. And she went through and she shared with you how we got to certain areas. But for this time, we want to invite everyone, both here, all two, and our people who are visiting us through digital space to do a virtual gallery walk. So what we're going to do, the way that this is going to work is, if you want to take out your cell phones, if you have cell phones with you, we're going to use a QR code. So here's what we want you to do. We're going to give you some time to visit one of the units that one of the teachers developed. So for those of you who are using your computers, Alysa is going to place a tiny URL inside of the group chat, which will give you access to the document. For everyone else, you can go ahead and use the QR code that's up there, and it'll take you directly, or if you're visiting us from home, you can take out your phone and you can scan the QR code, and it's going to take you to one of the curriculum project websites. And we're going to give you some thought time. So before we do that, Alysa, could you click on the link real quick so that way people can see what they're supposed to be looking at? Great, thank you. So you'll see here in this format, the way that this is set up, this particular group of teachers created a 7-week curriculum around social justice and education for 3rd grade. If you click on one of the links, each one of these links is hyperlinked. So if you click on it, it'll take you to that particular area in the presentation, right? So we want you to spend some time just bouncing back and forth, taking a look and seeing what our students developed, how they translated anti-racist concepts, ideas, discussions into actual classroom learning, okay? We have our guiding questions. If you could go back to the presentation, Alysa. So here are our guiding questions. As you are reviewing this particular unit of study, where in the units are students empowered to locate and attend to processes and practices of harm, abuse, and dehumanization in society? So it's not so much for our students to be able to recognize that when you're doing anti-racist education, it is not just for our students, that is the teachers that we're working with to identify it, but how do they get their students, the young ones, to identify this work? And so we're asking 3rd graders to think about this work. And some people may think that it's too much for 3rd graders to do this, but the truth is, how can it be too much when many of our 3rd graders are experiencing it? Many of them may not just have the language to be able to articulate what's going on, and part of what we're doing is we're helping them to develop that language. So that's the first question. The second question here is, where in the unit can students imagine, craft, and enact emancipatory learning? So once again, we wanted to take the guiding questions that guided our work with our teachers and have them think about it in terms of the work with their students. Our students should be involved in the process of dismantling racist regimes, systems of oppression, but then also be participants, intentional actors in the development of something new. So we want them to craft something new. So we're going to go ahead and give you some time on your own to go ahead and play around with this curriculum. Think about these inquiry questions. We have them up here on the screen, as well as Alysa placed them in the group chat. And then what we're going to do is we'll give you a few minutes, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put you into groups, and we want you to talk about it. Tell us what you're observing, right? What you're seeing based on these questions, or maybe something else that comes up. All right. So we'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. All right, folks, we'll give you about another minute to take a look at at the curriculum. Alysa, you have people already grouped into breakout rooms?
Yes, I am working on it right now with Pixita. So what we're going to do, folks, is in a moment, there'll be breakout rooms that open that are self-selected. So you can just join a room. And the idea is that folks just join a space so that they can discuss these questions together, discuss the time that you spent now just looking at that sample unit. And so in a moment here, the breakout rooms should open up and you will have the option to go ahead and select a room to join for your kind of dialogue and reflection on the unit that you just spent some time looking at.
What we're going to transition to, so, and you don't have to listen to this.
So folks who are joining us in the Zoom, you are welcome to go ahead. The rooms are open. If you just hit where it says choose breakout room, you can join a room and begin your dialogue with other folks. I see folks joining room 1, someone's joined room 2, and then
about 5 minutes in the rooms, okay?
And then, yeah, we'll bring everyone back in about 5 minutes. If you are having trouble joining a room, just let us know and the host can send you into a room. There we go. Folks are joining in. Thank you, Pixita.
Just let me know when you want me to call him back. I can also broadcast a message.
Yes, I will give you a 2-minute warning so you could broadcast that to them, and then I'll let you know when to close them. Thank you so much. Pixita, do you want to send the 2-minute warning? All right. Pixie, you can go ahead and close the rooms now. Bring everyone back.
I've closed the rooms. There's a 1 minute delay.
And I've been telling them over and over again, no, my parents. What I went.
All right. We want to come back? All right. So folks, we want to give you an opportunity to share out some of your thoughts. So I want to invite our participants with me in this live session, or anyone joining us. If you want to share your thoughts, please feel free to unmic yourself, or maybe you can place your thoughts in the chat. We'd love to get your feedback of what you saw, maybe in response to some of these questions here, or maybe something else came up as you were taking over. Do we have any takers? You are invited.
I don't know whether Asma in our group want to share this, but Asma just shared her activity in her classroom that, tell Asma, you're the one who need to tell. But anyway, Asma,
No,
I have
I
to tell you, no, I have to tell you, like in China, we have a very famous movie. The name is Asma, and she is a beautiful lady from the South Province in China. It's a great movie, and I grew up with that. Like my generation all knows she's beautiful, smart. So I have to tell you, I know Asma in the
Thank
way.
you so much.
So you can share your activity. Yeah.
We were talking about in our group, we were discussing the first lesson on cultural and personal identity. And I was sharing that I'm a high school teacher. I'm an ENL teacher at Lafayette High School. And we have 100% of our students are English language learners. And most of them are refugees from different parts of the world. And they all have different names and different way of pronouncing. So the first project in the beginning of the year is in my classroom is My Name is My Identity. And not only do we talk about how to pronounce our name, but what it means, what it represents, what kind of effect does it have on us? Does it have a religious connotation? Does it have a cultural connotation? And the importance of it, of a person's name. Your name is your identity. And I grew up in Grand Island, and most of my life, people have destroyed my name. They've called me Asma, Uzma, different ways of pronouncing my name, but I have been very adamant about correcting everyone. My name, not out of spite or anything, but I just want people to know that it has a significance. My parents didn't just give me a name out of the blue. It has some sort of meaning and reason behind it. And now when I'm a teacher and I have students from Africa, Middle East, and I don't know how to pronounce their names, and I don't want to kill their names either, because that's who they are. That's the first thing we learn about a student is their name. So the importance, and I looked at the slides, and the first thing it talked about was cultural and personal identity. So yeah, we need to really encourage teachers, educators to learn about our students, who our students are, where they come from, what is the significance of their culture in their life, and so on. Before I'm gonna go on and on, so stop me, Vixita, right now. That's it.
Thank you, Asma. Really appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. Names are important. Getting the names right is important. Having our young people tell us what they want to be called, and honoring that is important. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share their thoughts? Don't be shy, folks. We're here to learn with each other, right? You can't come to a presentation on anti-racist education and then just not just say anything. That defeats the purpose. What's that saying? I'm gonna modify it, right? But evil happens when good people stand by and do nothing, right? That I modified it, right? You all get what I'm saying.
Okay, I want to say something. I was sharing in my group talking about I love the Asperger thing, like the on top and the bottom, because it just to make me think how I see myself and other people picture myself, and also thinking about my children. You know, they go to school, majority of them are white. You know, we live in Williamsville, and how my daughter picture herself, especially when the COVID just started. And, you know, it's just so interesting how she tried to, maybe because she's teenager right now, she tried to hide her Asian identity at this moment. You know, kind of like I said, honey, you are a Chinese anyway, you know, always be. But she feel like, no, I was born in Canada. That's what her identification is. She identified herself as a Canadian, not a Chinese. As a, you are a Chinese, you will be a Chinese forever,
Right.
you know. But I think she is figuring her way out right now, like at this stage. And as parents and teachers, we need to just help her. And I feel like this, to me, I feel like, oh my gosh, this is third grade. I feel like this is, I mean, it can be used for even middle school and even high school. I mean, this unit, I mean, just depending on how deep you can go. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Professor Zhang. And I think you're right. You know, and I know your daughter, she's in middle school. And middle school is a time in which identity work takes place, right? You know, there are scholars who talk about this work. And to be able to talk about this in the international setting as well is very helpful. How about one more comment? One more comment before we close out.
This is Deuce. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So one of my thoughts was how even the assumptions of one's culture, right, and being able to provide a space for the students or the children to kind of own their culture. I think as one who grew up in another country, you come to America and you're told, you're American, this is how we do things. And then there's a conflict at home where there's still that culture that is embedded. And in some cultures, you know, at a young age, there's a pride in where you come from, the culture that you have. And so providing that space where it's okay to say, no, I don't feel and don't want to be identified as an American right now, especially, I just kind of even think about how in schools, you know, you're told to pledge allegiance to the flag. What does that look like, right? You know, if you don't identify as an American, are you going to be seen as a rebel from a young age? And then it starts being programmed into your mind or programmed into your, so.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Nietzsche. We appreciate it. So folks, we want to thank you all for participating in this short activity. Apparently, we're going to be kicked off of Zoom in a few minutes. So Alysa, you want to go ahead and jump to the very end?
Yes. And before you close, I just want to quickly offer super quick, this was a snapshot of a unit, and I'm so excited for the dialogue and the discussion that it brought. And it brought that same level. We did parent sessions before this unit began to socialize. Anti-racism, like supremacía blanca is not a term that is often used in Spanish, and it feels foreign to people. And so, I just wanted to offer this was a snapshot of a larger process, but in the same way that just in this quick 40 minutes, it brought dialogue and some thinking into our space here. It also brought a lot of dialogue and some deeper thinking to our community, even the parents. So there was a secondary byproduct of this work. And even the teachers, the fourth grade team was suddenly like, wait, you guys can do that with third graders? Maybe we should be stepping up our game too. And so I'm glad that folks were able to see a little bit, even if it was just a snapshot of what was happening. Dr. J.
Absolutely. So in this final moments here, if you have any questions, folks, please feel free to email us. But we wanted to end with Toni Morrison, Auntie Toni, right? When she talks about dreaming, right? She says that as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. And we just believe that this quotation is so apropos to this work because our students, our teachers, they want to get to the work. But if we can just pause for a moment and try to imagine a future anew, to do what Auntie T is telling us to do, to dream a little bit before we think, we can really come up with some powerful stuff, because I cannot think of another position that that centers trust and power or relies on trust and power like a classroom teacher. So with that, we want to thank you all for participating in our work. Alysa, if you want to go ahead and show the last screen, here are our email addresses, folks. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you all so much. It was a joy to be here from Colombia.
Thanks, everybody, for joining in, and many thanks to our presenters.
Thanks.